Welcome to the Facts That Matter. I'm Erin Wilson. Today I'm going to share 4 facts with you about user experience. First, I want to welcome Troy Wintzen, expert in security and technology and a WELL AP. Welcome, Troy.
Welcome. Thank you for having me.
Now, let's get to the facts. It's a fact that COVID pandemic has changed how people view, how they interact with family, shopping, work, and entertainment. It's a fact that building users want their work and home environments to be simple, safe, and secure. It's a fact that better working environments increase employee productivity by 19%, and 4 of 5 professionals state that the quality of their working environment is very important to their sense of job satisfaction. It's a fact that 65% of renters in the U.S. are young adults, and nearly 80% of millennials and Gen Zers are not planning on buying a home anytime soon. So 2 years ago, when the pandemic first started and everything locked down, so as everything started opening back up and people started evaluating what was important, the user experience, how they worked with everything changed. And usually when we talk about user experience, user interface, it's websites. But now it's really about how people are using the buildings, how they're working through the buildings, how they interact and move through the buildings. So how does that experience change how buildings are designed, how we do technology, how all of that works?
Those are very good points. After the pandemic, a lot of things opened up and changed a lot for all of us. Unfortunately, it told us what was kind of poor, and then when we opened up, we now are looking at doing things differently. Spaces are now more flexible. They need to remain flexible. You want to have a variety of use involved with it. In trying to retain employees, the Great Resignation has taught us that you cannot take anybody for granted. We also did full inventory at home, I think, and decided what was important to us, especially those people who maybe lost something. And in that entire process, we now look to that environment of what's pulling us out of home and saying, well, what is attractive about it? And if you look at the roots and the origins of experience design, you see that you can work your way up through a series of products. Everything from the iPhone, which made it very, very important to standardize on user interface and user experience. And you can work your way up and see what did Nintendo do that led up to that at first. Very important. Nintendo had a philosophy of the value and the use and the fun must be more important than the technology. Clearly, that was 100% passed on to other products. And then prior to that, they got their start selling Mickey Mouse, cards. And Disney is oftentimes credited with really looking at what the experience is and what that user engagement is. So answering your question as far as how does that dynamic change where we are today? Everything from the facts that you mentioned, renters want more amenity spaces. I'm seeing a reduction in living space and an increase in the public space where there's a fire pit, where there's a dog wash station, where there's a film room that you can watch film and entertainment, and they're pulling people out of their rooms and they're pulling them into engaging areas. A very extreme version of that is a property in Ohio that I recently worked on, where the company actually looked at having a brewery where you took your room that got you into the room, and you walked over and you could get a brew right there.
Oh,
and then you hang out over here, and the food trucks come up from various places, and they all do this. They have live music. And these are the living spaces. This is what we're seeing. In workplace, we're doing this. You're seeing that the workplace is more of a collaborative space that's interactive and is not so cubicle so a little less Dilbert and a little bit more like, getting engaged and being with your neighbors and connecting. And I think we're learning these lessons that we see from a long time ago when they changed and they said, let's make that amusement park more interactive. Let's make that device that you're staring at the screen, we don't need to pull out a manual. Let's just be able to engage in it right away. We're seeing a lot of that right now. And I think our buildings are being formed, and our designs are being affected in that way as well.
It's interesting because you talked about Nintendo and how Nintendo did it and Disney. The millennials and the Gen Zers are digital natives. The Gen Zs, they're the first ones that have grown up not knowing a world without technology. So as they come up and reach adulthood and are starting to interact on their own and not from their parents' house, that makes a lot of sense because they've grown up playing the games and growing up and from the Nintendo. Most of them probably really don't even know what the original Nintendo is, but the PS5 and the Xbox and there's something new out now, not just the visual reality, but it's something with the visual reality. Oculus, I think. I don't even know what most of that stuff is, but that has the kids engaged from a very early age, so now they're expecting that everywhere, to everything be able to interact with them like the games that they've grown up playing and the technologies that they've grown up with, because they don't know what a rotary dial phone is or having to use a library card to look something up. They've got their phone, everything's on the phone, just click away, maybe 2 clicks away, but that's how they've grown up. So it kind of makes sense that is what they're looking for and why the apartments are getting a little bit smaller in space and having all these interactive, because that's what they know. That's what they've grown up with. So that makes sense. And in that is some of the access control and how that access control integrates and that they can use their phone or their watch or a fob to unlock their doors. And they're wanting their home and their work environments to be simple. They want them safe. They want them secure. So our traditional access control is a card, starting to go to the phone now with mobile access. But how does that tie in with making everything interactive?
So this is where things get really exciting. You hear these terms, something maybe sounds like Internet of Things. You hear sensor fusion. You hear of this dynamic. But at the end of the day, they're all little touch points. And you really want them to work together. So for access control, we've had this goal and this vision of having movement through ability be free and feel free, not feel compartmentalized, and you want things to be frictionless. But you still, now that we're doing things today, you want to maintain privacy as well. You have PII, privacy, personal identifiable information. All of these things you want to be able to guard and protect. And just because you can do all of these things doesn't mean that you necessarily want to. This is like the kitchen that you have where I have 5 appliances, but do I really need 15? Or can I selectively choose which ones I want, and can I make best use out of the ones that can do maybe multiple tasks? And you're starting to see more of that now. For the last 20 years, you've been able to do building occupancy detection, where somebody can say, hey, we have these people in the building and we can react. Unfortunately, because of some events that have happened recently, we now also want to detect, oh, have we taken roll call when somebody's left, or who's left in the building if something comes up. So we're leveraging this more. But as you start adding all of these sensors, as you start adding all of these access controls and anything else in there, these are going to start working more and more together, and that needs to be managed. But before you can manage it, you really, really want to create your requirements, and that comes from a good, qualified, experienced designer. So in the world that I typically work in, I can see architects will frequently play this role, maybe an owner's rep, maybe the owner themselves is asking, but really pulling these devices and maximizing them and getting them to work together, I think will provide that safe and secure environment that at the same time we can get that usability and that desired function out of any environment that we're in, whether it's technological or not.
You said something, sensor fusion. I haven't heard that term. So what is that?
Sensor fusion is when you mix multiple sensors together to create to get one signal or to get one kind of image. For example, if you have a LiDAR detector that's looking out into the room and can see dimension, if I overlay or combine that with an image, I can now see what's far and what's close. Maybe I do the same thing with a thermal sensor. In access control, we don't see it a whole lot yet, but we're starting to get to that point where maybe instead of Bluetooth, maybe we're using ultra wideband, which has a much, much higher detection of being able to see where you are in the room. So sensor fusion would be adding multiple sensors to create an image as if it were one single data point coming in.
Interesting. Okay, so with all of that and being interactive and productivity and job satisfaction being enhanced by better working environments, it seems that interactability with the building is going to enhance that. But it's not just about how the building's used or the security. It's also about how the building occupant, the user, feels about their employer and the work environment that they're in. So how do employers and building owners need to look at things, or what do they need to do to help improve that user experience, that interactability with the buildings, having those flexible spaces?
When people come together to make a space and they design it and they build it, they assemble it, and they're looking at all of these different factors, building it in a well environment that takes in consideration people's health, their happiness, their satisfaction, sense of community, goes a long way. And happily, I think that building owners and designers can do things. Everything from scoring a building based on biophilia, or plants, based on life, having images and things around of life, light coming in, measuring that light, measuring that the sound, comfort level as far as air is concerned. All of these things kind of come into play, and then you also then can start building spaces that start taking people into consideration. Building owners can say, am I facilitating time off? Have I built a room for new mother support that's private and built to standards? Have I built in some of these other spaces that take in consideration the people that I have? So when you design that environment, which is the basis of experience design, you are actually taking the environment and the stuff that you interact with, and you're making it to where the occupant or the participant, if you think of it as an end user, however you want to describe that person, they can really kind of be the best that they are. And they can be engaged and they can do things that they need to and want to. The other things that are nice about this is that when you build that environment, you really start to include everybody. And that all comes through making the environment well enough to where when you're navigating it, it's obvious enough. And if you can combine that with a very good experience, you almost get a little bit of a story that goes on. The nice thing about that is that if you ever look at a story, there are no participants that don't belong. Everybody has a script, there's every character. Now you start taking in people who may have not otherwise traditionally been considered. So building that environment in such a way, taking lessons learned from user experience so that some behaviors become natural and other behaviors become discouraged just through natural settings. That goes a long way.
So making people comfortable, basically making people comfortable in a space where they walk in and it might be a new space, but because of everything that's involved and how it's thought and how it's laid out, it's comfortable and familiar.
Yes.
And so they're at ease. So then all of that stuff, the community, everything just kind of comes together. Everybody's included. It's comfortable.
Yes, and satisfactory. Hotels and hospitality have been dealing with this a lot, where if you feel more engaged and you feel happier and you feel more of a community, you feel safer. So in addition to some of these elements that you can set up, so in security, we've dealt with CPTED for a very long time. That's crime prevention through environmental design, meaning if I put light here, people are less likely to create any kind of a crime. If I put furniture here, if I can increase my flow, if I can see my vision. Taking those same principles and building it in a well environment and having it, you can even well certify it if you want. You can actually start developing it so that people start interacting and start flowing through that. It becomes conducive to whatever behavior. You can actually discourage unfavorable behaviors, and you can actually encourage those things which really make you a destination or really give you that experience, some reason to come in to whatever space that is, whether that's school, so that it can be more engaged and feel more happy and comfortable, or whether it is tourism or space or anything like vacationing or any other kind of touring type activity where you are inviting people in. If I have some reason to come into the office 2 days a week, maybe then I can remotely work 3 days or vice versa, but giving people an incentive to come in to participate. That's when you're going to start getting that story and that experience. Then you start getting inclusion. And then everybody starts interacting with one another in a way that is conducive to what you're trying to actually, the whole reason why you even have a building.
So we've talked a lot about a workplace environment, a hotel, and we touched a little bit on apartments and how some of the apartments are going in, having maybe smaller living spaces and more amenities with fire pits and the one you mentioned that has the brewery and the food trucks and have that interactability. Is there anything else that needs to be done with 65% of young adults renting? What else? What gives them that is that enough to give them that sense of well-being and community? Or is there more that apartment owners and developments need to look at from that side, from the home side, apartment side, for their properties to have that whole inclusive user experience and environment that is still comfortable and familiar?
I think that there's a lot that can be done in communities where people are living. Builders have been answering these questions for a long time, mixing in these spaces. I think some of the stuff that you see with technology happening is we're seeing more like what they call aging in place and independent living. I know that's not your 65% of younger people, but it is a very important demographic. And I think it's starting to inform the younger people as well. So you're seeing these where you have more biometric sensors. Again, very important that privacy and all of your individual rights are contained or preserved. But where you also see a lot of things that can start to take advantage are where you have flash events that can pop up through communicating. So you have various forms of interacting that occurs in the homes, where you take some of those aging in place. You can even take people who are now starting to live more independently, that may have physical or mental differences than we do. And now with sensors and people being able to see when there's trouble and when things are normal, we now know when we can pop in and check in on people and when we can engage. So pulling all of these together to really push forward that human experience is important. Architects and building designers have been doing this for a long time, where they're making it not so steel and concrete, but making it useful and happy. We on the technology side are now having to learn that same thing and apply those. Just because I can plug it in and I can make it whirl or have flashing lights doesn't mean that it helps what we're trying to do. Everything from safety, whether I'm guarding a pool so that we can keep the pool hours open, so maybe I'm looking for, maybe I have cameras on there that are detecting when something is inappropriate, in addition to the people that are there. Having those community spaces where people can gather and do it safely without it feeling like it's a mob. Really allowing people to function and augment what they're trying to do as being a person. That, I think, is the important task, is how do we layer these technology in these elements in such a way that people can interact with them but still engage as a community. And once you start doing that, I think it starts working its way back in the house as well, or in the dwelling, where everything from lighting to air to sound, but things that can be really measured so that you can now move things around as needed and get people to participate when and where they choose to, rather than feel like, well, it's a snowy day, I have to go home, or it's a sunny day, it's too hot, I can't be out. Really just pulling these elements together so that people can start engaging more in the spaces that they occupy, I think is important.
Yeah, you mentioned community and having that, and we've talked about that a little bit. And I think we're going back towards that. You know, when I was a kid, there was a lot of sense of community. Everybody knew each other. And we've gotten away from that as a society, but I think that's one thing that the pandemic has done, is brought that sense of community back into our lifestyles. And you're starting to see it, the younger generations, the millennials, the Gen Zs, they crave that, they want that. And the older demographics, the boomers and some of the Xers are, you know, they're getting to a point where they're empty nesters and they're wanting to downsize, and some of those amenities and that community sense of community, it brings back nostalgia, it brings back memories of having that, and I think a lot of them are gravitating towards that too, to have that, all of that together, that it just makes, you know, when you have a community that you interact with, that you have that makes you feel safe. and secure as well.
I definitely think that that's important. The more engaged you are, I think the more concerned you are with what's going on around you, and you get people that feel happier to be out in common spaces and common areas and interacting with each other. I remember hearing a story of how Disney was sitting at a park before he made Disneyland and wondered why the people sitting on the side had to wait and do nothing while his daughter went on the rides. And he decided to make that change of really including everybody and making it an inclusive experience. And I think when you start involving inclusion, you start getting people that are engaged more, and I think they're comfortable more, and I think that raises the level of security.
So for all that matters, what matters the most?
I think as you start to look at experience design and creating an environment that can be responsive, you have an environment where people start participating and getting involved, and yet at the same time, they're doing it very, very comfortably. And I think that makes a little bit more of a human experience, a safer environment, one that's happier, and that I think is more fulfilling. To be able to layer technology and architectural elements in a way that encourages that, I think it's something that everybody is happier with at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think so too. It doesn't seem, access control at one point in time was very institutional, and now it's come back to, we see it every day, we use it every day, it's in our phones, it's in our watches. But yeah, it makes it a lot the way it is now, and that how you experience it and bringing it back to a kind of a simpler level. It's complex, but bringing it down to that user experience and well-being and feeling safe and secure is what we're going to see. We're going to see more of this. Any final thoughts before we go?
One thing that strikes me based on the conversation that we've had today is on my way over here, I had a great opportunity to sit next to somebody who has very similar to my son. He doesn't sit still, he's a grown man, and he's nonverbal and cannot talk. And being around somebody like that, not so long ago, those people were encouraged to stay home and be by themselves. When you're in an environment where you start encouraging people to gather and you start encouraging them to interact, they then become not tolerant, but more of accepting. And the way that you help this acceptance is you tell a story and you make an experience. And if people see that there's an experience going on in an event, they don't mind inviting other people in. The sense of inclusion creates a greater sense of security, a greater sense of usability, and a greater sense of happiness. These are the things that make our environments better overall. And if we can layer these very carefully and intelligently, we get an overall better experience. Thinking things through and planning them goes a long way to help this.
I like that, that whole planning, making sure, engagement, and inclusive. Thank you for joining me today, Troy. Glad to have you.
Thank you.
I'm Erin Wilson, and thanks for joining us on another discussion about the facts that matter. Remember, subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell to be alerted to new Facts That Matter episodes.